I never thought I'd fall in love in an emergency room, but I guess life has a way of surprising you when you're at your most vulnerable. It was 1983, and I was 24 years old, bleeding out on a gurney after a construction accident that should have killed me. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was a pair of steady hands pressing against my abdomen and a voice, calm and certain, saying, "Stay with me. I've got you." When I finally opened my eyes 3 days later, he was there. Dr. Marcus Chen, the trauma surgeon who'd worked on me for 7 hours straight, refusing to give up even when the other doctors said it was hopeless. He was sitting in the chair by my hospital bed, his head tilted back against the wall, fast asleep. Even exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his surgical scrubs wrinkled beyond recognition, he was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. I didn't know it then, but that moment would define the rest of my life. My name is David, and this is the story of how a stranger saved my life and then spent the next 40 years teaching me how to live it. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning. I was working a construction job in downtown Chicago, 20 stories up on a high-rise that was going to be some fancy office building. I'd been doing construction since I was 18, following in my father's footsteps, though he'd never been particularly proud of me for anything. We didn't talk much. There were things about me he didn't want to know, and I wasn't ready to tell him anyway. It was 1983, and being gay wasn't something you advertised, especially not in the blue-collar world I inhabited. The scaffolding gave way without warning. One moment I was securing a beam, and the next I was falling through empty air, my stomach lurching into my throat. I hit a lower platform on the way down, which probably saved my life, but also tore me open in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, like fire spreading through my entire body. I remember someone screaming and then realizing it was me. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and voices and hands trying to keep me still. I kept fading in and out, catching fragments of conversation, massive internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping. We're losing him. And then that voice, cutting through everything else with absolute authority. "Not on my watch. Step on it." I found out later that Marcus had been in the ambulance by chance. He was finishing a shift at County General when the call came in about my accident, and he jumped in with the paramedics, knowing that someone with my injuries wouldn't survive the trip without immediate intervention. He'd performed an emergency procedure right there in the back of that ambulance, his hands inside my body, literally holding my life together until we reached the hospital. When I woke up 3 days later and saw him sleeping in that chair, I didn't know any of this. I just knew that I was alive and in pain, and this stranger had stayed. A nurse came in and saw me awake, and her face broke into this huge smile. "Oh, thank God," she said, loud enough to wake Marcus. "Dr. Chen, he's awake." Marcus jerked upright, instantly alert in that way doctors have. His eyes met mine, and I saw relief wash over his face. "David," he said, and I was surprised he knew my name. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fell off a building," I managed to croak out. My throat was raw from the breathing tube they'd had down it. He laughed, and it was the warmest sound I'd ever heard. "Well, you're not wrong. You gave us quite a scare." He stood up and came to my bedside, checking my vitals with practiced efficiency. But there was something gentle in the way he moved, like he was handling something precious. Over the next 2 weeks, as I recovered in that hospital bed, Marcus came to see me every day. At first it was just medical check-ins, but gradually our conversations deepened. He'd pull up that same chair and we'd talk about everything and nothing. I learned that he was 32, that he'd grown up in San Francisco, that he'd known he wanted to be a doctor since he was 8 years old. He told me about his family, immigrants from Taiwan who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. He talked about medical school and the exhausting beauty of trauma surgery, how every life saved felt like winning a small war against the universe. I told him about construction, about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. I told him about growing up in a small town in Indiana, about my complicated relationship with my father, about moving to Chicago to escape and reinvent myself. I didn't tell him the most important thing about me, though. I wasn't ready for that. In 1983, being gay could cost you everything, and I'd spent too many years learning to hide. But Marcus had a way of looking at me that made me feel seen anyway, like he understood the things I wasn't saying. There was this moment, about a week into my recovery, when he was checking the surgical site and his hand lingered just a second longer than necessary on my shoulder. Our eyes met, and something passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. My heart started racing, and I saw him glance at the monitor, watching my elevated heart rate with a small, knowing smile. "You're healing well," he said softly. But I knew he wasn't just talking about my physical injuries. The day I was discharged, I felt this crushing sense of loss. I'd been in the hospital for 16 days, and Marcus had become the center of my world. I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. I didn't even know if what I suspected about him was real or just wishful thinking. As he signed my discharge papers, I tried to memorize everything about him: the way his hair fell across his forehead, the slight accent that colored certain words, the gentle competence of his hands. "Take care of yourself, David," he said, handing me the papers. "Follow up with your primary care doctor in 2 weeks, and take it easy. No construction work for at least 3 months. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt impossibly inadequate. "For everything. For saving my life." He smiled, but there was something sad in it. "That's my job." I was halfway to the door when I heard him call my name. I turned back, and he was standing there looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen from him before. "David, this is probably inappropriate, and you can absolutely say no, but would you want to get coffee sometime? Just to check in on how you're doing, medically speaking." We both knew it wasn't just medical. The air between us crackled with possibility and danger and hope. "I'd like that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd really like that." Our first coffee date was at a small diner on the north side, far enough from the hospital that we were unlikely to run into anyone Marcus worked with. We were both nervous, dancing around what this was, what it could be. It was still the height of the AIDS crisis, and being gay meant living with constant fear. Every cough could be a death sentence. Every new relationship carried impossible weight. But as we sat across from each other in that sticky vinyl booth, drinking terrible coffee and talking for 3 hours straight, I felt something I'd never felt before: hope. Marcus told me, haltingly, about his own journey of self-discovery, about the loneliness of being closeted in a profession that demanded everything from him. He told me about losing colleagues to AIDS, about the helplessness of being a doctor who couldn't save the people he cared about most. I told him about the shame I'd carried my whole life, about the way my father had looked at me when I was 17 and he'd found a magazine hidden in my room, about the silence that had existed between us ever since, about the fear that had shaped every decision I'd made. "I'm tired of being afraid," I said finally, surprised by my own honesty. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, right there in public, and my breath caught. "Me too," he said. We started seeing each other regularly after that, though we had to be careful. This was Chicago in 1983, and being openly gay could cost Marcus his career and me my job. We met at his apartment mostly, a small one-bedroom in Lakeview that became my sanctuary. He'd cook dinner, terrible attempts at Chinese food that made us both laugh, and we'd sit on his worn couch and talk until late into the night. The first time he kissed me, we were washing dishes together after one of those dinners. I was drying a plate when he just turned to me, soap suds still on his hands, and cupped my face with such tenderness that I thought I might break apart. "Is this okay?" he asked, and I nodded, unable to speak. When his lips met mine, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. We made love for the first time a month after that first kiss, and it was nothing like the fumbling encounters I'd had before, quick and shameful in the dark. Marcus touched me like I was something precious, learning my body with the same careful attention he brought to everything. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, he traced the scar from my surgery with his fingertips. "I was so scared I was going to lose you," he whispered. "Even before I knew you, I couldn't bear the thought of you dying." "You saved me," I said. "We saved each other," he replied. The years that followed were hard in ways I couldn't have anticipated. We lived in the shadows, always careful, always watching. We couldn't hold hands in public or introduce each other as anything more than roommates when we finally moved in together in 1985. My father died in 1987 without ever knowing the truth about me, and I carried that grief like a stone in my chest. The AIDS crisis devastated our community. We lost friends, watched strong men waste away to nothing. Marcus worked himself to exhaustion at the hospital, trying to save everyone, and I held him when he came home broken after losing another patient. We got tested regularly, lived with constant anxiety, celebrated every negative result like a stay of execution. But through it all, we had each other. Marcus taught me how to be brave in small ways, how to take up space in the world, how to believe I deserved happiness. I taught him how to rest, how to let someone take care of him for a change. We built a life together in the margins, creating our own family from the friends who knew our truth. In 1993, we had a commitment ceremony in his sister's backyard in California. It wasn't legal, wouldn't be for years, but it was real. 20 people who loved us, a beautiful summer day, and Marcus in a suit that made my heart stop. When he said his vows, promising to love me through everything, I cried like a baby. We weathered the decades together. I went back to school, became a civil engineer, eventually started my own small firm. Marcus became the head of trauma surgery at County General, training the next generation of doctors. We bought a house in Andersonville, got a dog, lived a life that looked ordinary from the outside, but felt revolutionary to us. When marriage equality finally came to Illinois in 2014, we were in our 50s, and we'd already been together for 31 years. We went to the courthouse on a Tuesday morning, just like the Tuesday morning when we'd met, and made it official. Marcus wore the same suit from our commitment ceremony, a little tighter now, but still perfect. The clerk who married us cried when we kissed. Legally married, Marcus said afterward, looking at our marriage certificate with wonder. After all these years. We were always married, I said. This is just paperwork. But it mattered. My God, it mattered. Now it's 2023, and we're both 64 years old. Marcus retired last year, and we're learning how to be together in new ways, filling our days with the small pleasures we'd always been too busy for. Morning walks with our dog, long dinners where we cook together and laugh at our old stories, quiet evenings reading side by side on the couch. Last week we went back to County General for an event honoring Marcus's 40 years of service. As we walked through those familiar halls, I thought about the terrified 24-year-old who'd been wheeled in here on a gurney, certain he was going to die. I thought about how Marcus's hands had literally held my heart, had pieced me back together, had saved my life. But the real miracle wasn't the surgery. It was everything that came after. It was 40 years of choosing each other every single day. It was building a life together when the world told us we couldn't. It was learning that love isn't just a feeling, but a practice, a commitment, a revolution. This morning, I woke up to find Marcus watching me sleep, the way he used to in that hospital room all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "That scaffolding collapsed on exactly the right day, that I was in exactly the right ambulance, that I got to spend the last 40 years loving you." "I'm the lucky one," I said. "You saved my life." He kissed me, gentle and familiar. "You saved mine too," he said. "Every day, you save mine too." People ask me sometimes what it's like, being in a relationship for 40 years. They want to know the secret, like there's some trick to it. But the truth is simpler and harder than any trick. The truth is that love is a choice you make over and over again. It's showing up when it's hard. It's holding someone through their worst moments and celebrating their best ones. It's building something together that's bigger than either of you alone. Marcus saved my life in that emergency room, but he's been saving it ever since. Every day he chooses me, I get to live a little more. Every moment we share is a gift I never thought I'd get to have. We've lived through plague and prejudice, through loss and fear and uncertainty. We've buried friends and celebrated victories and held each other through it all. And here we are, 64 years old, still learning new things about each other, still finding ways to make each other laugh, still in love after all these years. If you told that scared 24-year-old on the gurney that the man saving his life would become the love of his life, would stand beside him for 40 years, would teach him what it means to be truly seen and loved, I don't think I would have believed you. I'd spent so long thinking I didn't deserve happiness that people like me had to settle for shadows and secrets. But Marcus taught me different. He taught me that our love wasn't something to hide, but something to celebrate. That we deserved all the ordinary magic of a life built together. That saving each other wasn't just about emergency surgery, but about the daily practice of choosing love. So yeah, I fell in love in an emergency room, and then I spent 40 years falling deeper, learning that the real miracle wasn't surviving the fall, but finding someone who'd catch you and never let go. Someone who'd save your life and then show you how to live it. Someone who'd turn your worst day into the beginning of your best life. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're out there, scared and alone, thinking you don't deserve love, I want you to know, you do. We all do. And sometimes, love finds you in the most unexpected places, when you're at your most vulnerable, when you think you have nothing left to give. Sometimes it saves your life, and if you're very, very lucky, it keeps saving you every single day for the rest of your life. That's what Marcus did for me, and I hope, in my own small way, I did the same for him.